Chapter 1. The Unlikely Encounter. The ballroom of the Grand Istanbul Charity Gala glittered under golden chandeliers, casting an ethereal glow over the assembled guests. The room was alive with murmurs of polite conversation, the soft clinking of crystal glasses, and the occasional laughter from well-dressed aristocrats who moved about in graceful circles, discussing business, philanthropy, and social affairs. Aisha adjusted the sleeves of her modest but elegant black abaya, feeling distinctly out of place amidst the extravagance. The flowing silk fabric was simple compared to the sequined gowns and embroidered dresses worn by many of the other women in attendance. She had never been fond of these social events, but her father had insisted. "You must attend, Aisha," he had said earlier that evening, his face etched with the kind of seriousness that left no room for argument. "This is not just about charity. It is about connections." Connections. That word tasted bitter on her tongue. She didn't want to be here, mingling with the city's elite, many of whom donated to charity only to flaunt their wealth and social status. If it were up to her, she would have quietly sent a donation and stayed home, where she could focus on her work, her real passion, organizing community-led aid projects that made a tangible difference in people's lives. But here she was, standing at the edge of the ballroom, trying not to fidget under the scrutinizing eyes of women who viewed her as a curiosity. She knew what they saw: an educated young woman from an influential family who stubbornly refused to conform to their world of glamour and strategic marriages. Taking a deep breath, she turned to scan the room for familiar faces when she heard a deep, smooth voice behind her. "Aisha Rahman?" She turned sharply and found herself looking into the intense, dark eyes of Khalid Al-Mansur. Aisha's stomach clenched involuntarily. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. He was the ruthless business tycoon whose empire stretched across continents, his name synonymous with power and wealth. He had built his fortune by dismantling competitors with cold precision, leaving behind a trail of shattered companies and defeated rivals. His face often graced the front pages of financial magazines, but in person he was even more intimidating. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence commanded attention without effort. His sharp, well-defined features remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze as he looked at her. "Yes?" she answered cautiously, unwilling to show any intimidation. "I believe we're supposed to be seated at the same table." Aisha internally groaned. Of all the people she could have been assigned to sit next to, why did it have to be him? But she forced a polite nod and followed him toward the grand dining table, reserved for high-profile guests. The dinner began with extravagant dishes being served by impeccably dressed waiters. But Aisha hardly touched her food. She found herself keenly aware of Khalid's presence beside her, his quiet dominance exuding a kind of energy that unsettled her. At first, she remained silent, listening as the conversation at the table drifted toward business, investments, and economic policies. Khalid spoke rarely, but when he did, the entire table listened. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. But when the discussion shifted to charity work, Aisha could no longer hold back. "I believe charity must be more than just writing a check," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It should be about sustainability, creating long-term solutions rather than temporary relief." Khalid turned to her, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "That's a noble thought, Miss Rahman. But not everything in life can be solved with idealism." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "And what do you believe in, Mr. Al-Mansur? That power and wealth are all that matter?" His smirk deepened, as if amused by her challenge. "Power and wealth build solutions. Without them, idealism is just wishful thinking." Aisha clenched her jaw. "That's a cynical way to look at the world." and yours is naive. The tension at the table became palpable, and a few guests exchanged awkward glances. Aisha refused to back down, but she also knew it was pointless to argue with someone like Khalid Al-Mansur. For the rest of the dinner they barely spoke, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her more than once. Later that night, as she left the gala, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Khalid had found their argument amusing, as if he were toying with her. What she didn't realize was that their paths were only beginning to intertwine. The nightmare began a week later. Aisha sat in her father's study, her hands tightly clasped together as her father delivered the news. Khalid Al-Mansur has proposed marriage. The world seemed to tilt. Excuse me? Her father, a normally strong and dignified man, looked weary. Our business is struggling, Aisha. I have debts that I cannot repay. Khalid has offered to take care of everything on one condition. She felt sick. That condition is me. Her father looked away. Ashamed. Aisha stood abruptly. No, absolutely not. I would rather starve than marry that man. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, she snapped. This isn't a proposal. It's a transaction. Her father's hands trembled. If I don't accept, we will lose everything. Aisha. Everything your mother and I built. I don't want this for you, but I am left with no choice. Tears pricked her eyes. How could Khalid do this? Was this his idea of revenge for their argument? Or was it just another cold-blooded business move? When she stormed into Khalid's office the next day, he didn't look surprised. He sat behind his desk, calm, powerful, waiting. You think you can buy me? She seethed. He leaned back. I think I can save your family. Her hands curled into fists. And in exchange, I become your wife. A wife you don't even want. He arched a brow. Who says I don't want you? She felt her face heat with fury. This is wrong. It's reality, he said smoothly. You can fight it, or you can accept it. She wanted to throw something at him. She wanted to scream. But deep down, she knew her father was right. If she said no, their family would suffer. And Khalid knew it too. With the weight of 1,000 burdens, she whispered, Fine. I'll marry you. Khalid smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was victory. The wedding was set for the following week. Aisha had always imagined her wedding day to be a moment of joy, love, and anticipation. Instead, she felt like a prisoner walking toward her own execution. The preparations were swift and efficient, orchestrated by Khalid's staff with the precision of a military operation. There was no excitement, no personal touch, just cold efficiency. It became clear to Aisha that this was not a union between two people, but rather a contract being finalized, a transaction being completed. Despite the extravagance of the arrangements, she felt detached from it all. The wedding dress was a masterpiece ivory silk with delicate gold embroidery, the kind of gown most brides dreamed of wearing. But when she stood before the mirror, staring at herself in the opulent fabric, all she saw was a stranger. Her mother, a quiet and gentle woman, entered the room, her eyes filled with unshed tears. You look beautiful, Habibti, she whispered. Aisha swallowed hard, trying to keep her own emotions at bay. Am I making a mistake? Her mother hesitated before taking Aisha's hands in hers. Sometimes we do not choose our path. It is chosen for us. But even in the darkest of circumstances, Allah has His wisdom. Aisha wished she could believe that. The wedding ceremony was grand, attended by dignitaries, business elites, and aristocrats. The Imam led the nikah. Aisha listened to the lecture with a numb heart. She felt Khalid's presence beside her, strong and unwavering. He recited his vows without hesitation, his deep voice echoing through the hall. He looked every bit the composed. Powerful man she had come to despise, cold, unreadable, untouchable. When the ceremony concluded, Aisha was surrounded by well-wishers, but their words felt empty. She saw envy in some eyes, pity in others. They all saw her as the girl who had married a billionaire. None of them knew she had been sold to him. Later that evening, as they arrived at Khalid's vast mansion, Aisha stepped inside and felt the suffocating weight of reality. The house was magnificent, high ceilings, marble floors, chandeliers that seemed to touch the sky, but it was also sterile, devoid of warmth. "This is your home now," Khalid said. Home. The word felt like a cruel joke. She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "Do not expect me to play the role of a loving wife." Khalid regarded her with amusement. "I wouldn't insult you by expecting that." Aisha's stomach twisted with resentment. "Then what do you expect?" "That you honor this arrangement," he replied smoothly. "Be my wife in name. Attend events with me when required. Keep up appearances. Beyond that, you are free to do as you wish." Her heart pounded. "So, you're saying we can live separate lives? If that's what you want." Aisha searched his face for any hint of emotion, but he gave nothing away. She let out a bitter laugh. "You really are heartless." He didn't react. Instead, he simply said, "You'll find your room upstairs. I won't bother you tonight." Aisha turned on her heel, storming up the grand staircase. If he thought she was going to accept this fate quietly, he was wrong. She might be trapped, but she would never be his.